Like in my family's case, it would always start with, well, I'm out with the guys and everyone's having a beer and alcohol's not my problem, so I can have a beer. But again, if you're someone who's got a severe addiction to Coke or crack or meth or something, then often that's just one beer, and then the next thing you know, it's a crack pipe or whatever it is.
So it's a bit from Dr. Lisa. Today it's just Dr. Lisa and I for this episode, which are some of my favorite episodes. As much as I do love having guests on, Lisa and I have become very close, and our conversations often lead to some of the best recordings that we've made here on the Ashes to Awesome. So I hope you enjoy it. Listen, if you're really liking our content, go ahead, hit that like, comment, share, subscribe button, depending on what platform you're on. It's the best way to support us continuing to spread the message, and I really do appreciate every single interaction. The title sponsor for today's episode is Yatra Trauma Center here in Krabi, Thailand, where I reside. For those of you that are new to the platform, I started my healing journey in Thailand when I came to Yatra to experience their residential treatment program for trauma. As they are very fond of saying, where addiction is a smoke, trauma is a fire. Very much the case in my story. And you can learn more about them, as well as see a bunch of episodes that Mike Miller, the head clinician, has been on with us. If you head to a2apodcast.com/trauma. And in the meantime, enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Watchers, listeners, supporters of all kinds. Welcome to another episode of the Ashes to Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Chuck LaFlange, in Krabi, Thailand. Halfway around the world is my lovely co-host, Dr. Lisa. How are you doing today, Lisa?
Good. I'm, we're always doing this on the weekends. And so you're always getting me at the better part of the week anyway. But this was like first week back to school, first week back to, not all of the extracurricular things have started up. But yeah, so we're going to get back into a routine.
Which is always a good thing, right? And hey, you know what? It's a good thing for the platform here too. Not going to lie, we were talking about that last week off of pre-record or whatever, but everybody gets back to work, more people can pay attention to things like podcasts, so it's a good thing for us as well. So welcome back, everyone, if you are getting back into your podcast listening routines. And yeah, right. I learned that very early on, that there's a summer lull, which makes sense, right? People just don't have the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, we saw that even with my own mom, right? I mean, my mom is like this faithful listener, and then
yeah, she is.
Yeah. But I think too, during the summer, right? People go on vacations. People have visitors.
Barbecues
and
on
so
the weekends.
your
all
days
stuff,
are just
right?
just different. So
yeah, of course they are, right? So
it's going to be 31 degrees in Calgary this weekend.
Holy, that's 80 in American, right? So yeah.
Yeah,
it's not so bad for September.
It's definitely warm for this time of year.
They used to call that back in the day an Indian summer, right? Before that was not a politically correct thing to say, but this show has never really been politically correct, so whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah, that's true. I remember that when I was a kid.
Yeah. You were a kid in Calgary?
No, I remember that term.
Okay. See, that's a Calgary thing because of the Chinooks and whatever, right? But I thought it was. I didn't realize it was a nation.
Yeah.
That people would use that term.
I
mean, the I word people used, of course, right? But yeah.
Yeah. No, but the summer thing, like I remember that term when I was a kid.
Oh, really? Okay. I just assumed it was a Chinook thing. So there you go. Center of the universe kind of thinking there. I guess that was. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, after last weekend's episode, and for anybody that's listening now, the episode that aired last weekend with Tony from AARC, with Tony and Kiara from AARC, I should say, go back and listen to it if you haven't had a chance to. Absolutely wonderful conversation, a couple of wonderful people. It's so rare that we get a father on, right? And Tony, I said to Kiara post-record that I could not have picked a better father if I tried from the AARC program to come on and speak about his experience, right? The kind of empathy and right?
Yeah. I know. I thought he was great too. And it's true. Like we don't get many dads, which is something I always find interesting because I think I've said it before, but in my family, it would be the opposite, if one of my parents were going to speak, it would be my dad. Even if they were both present, he's the one who would be more vocal.
Yeah.
But in general, we get a lot more moms, right? And
yes,
I think it sort of speaks to the fact that I think men tend to be, and we're stereotyping, but I think they tend to be more proud, more stoic, more private. I think they feel more shame, actually.
I would think so. Yeah.
You know, because I think men have this idea in their heads that they're supposed to be the protector of the family and you know, so when something is not working or broken or hurt and they can't fix it, I think there's a lot of shame that comes with that.
Hey, just a quick interruption for the all too important PSA. Today's PSA is brought to you by AARC. That's the Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center, located in Alberta. Given the climate of everything that's going on right now with the opioid epidemic, and let's face it, the young people that we are losing so very fast at such an alarming rate, programs like AARC are an absolute must, and I hope that they get duplicated in full or in part in other jurisdictions. What they offer is a peer-to-peer support system that involves the entire family. And it's a treatment program for adolescents in severe SUD. They're doing wonderful work there. I encourage you to check them out. You can learn more at arc.ab.ca. And here's Chad with your PSA.
Hey, what's up? This is Chad from the Valyear Show. I don't carry a bag around that doesn't have at least one of these or one of these in it. And I carry them because people are dying and dead addicts can't recover. So I don't care how you're finding recovery. I don't care what fellowship you belong to. I don't care if you're using harm reduction. Let's take death out of the equation. Let's stop people from dying. More love, less judge. Peace.
A few evenings a week for 4 hours because it took you hours to get there. Yeah. But they did include family, like they would do sessions with family members. And then when there were like passes or outings on weekends, which similar to AARC involved sending, you know, a kid would go home to their family for a day. It worked up. It started out as hours, then it would be day, then it would be overnight, then it would be weekend. So they worked up, and the kid would always go with a peer who was also in the program, but who was further along in the program. So there were some similarities there, but yeah, like, and I appreciate that, you know, we've heard AARC talk about their awareness that it is what they're looking for from the family is a big commitment. But no, we absolutely would have been there.
Yeah.
And it actually kills because AARC existed. Like, I mean, we would have come to Calgary and done AARC. That's where we were.
Right.
Like, we would have.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You know?
Well, we do know some other stories where people have relocated to Calgary, either temporarily or permanently, to attend the program with kids, right? So I think that's speaks a lot to what they have to offer if people are willing to do that. Let's go back a bit, though, Lisa, into your story, right? I've talked about it quite a bit with people and just in tidbits. But what does that look like for you? If you want to give us I don't even want to say the Coles notes, just tell us about it and we'll go from there.
Yeah. I know it's funny because I feel like having done this podcast now for like a year and a half and like talking about various details of it, like it almost makes it harder to know where to start the story and where to take it and what to share. I remember the first time, Chris, you and I got on the phone, right? I think you had recorded with Devin that day.
Yes, I had.
Or maybe the day before.
I had released it, so yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think we got on the phone, and I don't know if you got a word in, because I was like, here's my story. I was just like...
True story, yeah.
You know, because I think I remember you were like, okay, wait. Like, you know, let's... Again, killing content, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I grew up in Labrador, and with like a pretty typical... I don't know if it's typical, because maybe the typical family... Like I had a good childhood. Like I grew up in a little town with a loving family, like grandma up the road, uncles up the road, cousins down the street. Like, you know what I mean? Like, a good sense of community, a good family, a loving family, a supportive family. I think a pretty healthy family. And certainly if you go up to my grandparents, there was severe alcoholism, like really, really severe alcoholism. But in my immediate family, there wasn't, like, my parents might have wine at Christmas dinner or something, but like my
Yeah.
dad didn't sit on the couch and drink beer and watch sports. Like, and not that there's anything wrong with that for people who,
Yeah.
don't have a problem with alcohol, but they're like, it just wasn't in my house. And I think, again, because it was on my mom's side of the family that there had been a lot of alcoholism, she was very, like, she didn't want any of that stuff around our house. And so it really wasn't there. And, I was involved in sports. My brother was involved in sports. And it was through sports, which people think that's how we keep our kids safe, right? Keep them busy, put them in activities, put them in sports. And, I have a brother who is a really good hockey player. And, and again, my parents were involved in it. It wasn't like a thing to stick him in so that they didn't have to be with them or deal with them, or, it was just, he was good at it. He loved it. And it was almost, again, like a family thing. Like, I even remember being in university, and he would have hockey tournaments, and I'd be like, okay, well, I lived on my own when I went to university, but I would sometimes go and join them for weekends in random towns, and we'd stay in the hotel, and because families all become friends.
Of
And
course.
so he he was this good athlete, but that's where drugs first came onto the scene. And I know buddies of his have said that, from really early days, like, there'd be drugs at a party and people would do them and walk away, but then he'd be, if it hadn't run out, he would continue to use when most people would go home or fall asleep or whatever. But I think, so through high school, my parents knew he was smoking weed. I don't know if they knew early on that there were other things, but kind of like what Tony talked about last week, it's like, how heavy do you put down the hammer? You don't want to, you want to try to keep lines of communication open. You don't want to over pathologize everything. You don't want to freak out, over little things. And so I think, they knew he was smoking weed, and I think that they just kind of thought, well, he's a teen, and
so
they normalized
fair assumption,
it.
though, really, right?
Yeah. And we know now that it was in high school that he had, like I said, started sort of experimenting with, party drugs. And the specifics, I don't know all the fine details, but, I think it was like things like ecstasy or cocaine or whatever. And I think he started to realize that maybe that experience for him was different than other people. And so when he finished high school, my parents moved towns, and he made the decision to go with them. And I do believe part of that was him trying to get away and sort of fresh start and that kind of thing. And he did that for a while. But I think, ended up sort of not in an acute active addiction kind of way, but I do think genetically, I think his brain was wired that he was going to have these challenges. And you'll hear that story a lot, right? When you talk to someone who's in hardcore, deep, active, serious addiction, that there were a number of years where it was a little bit more casual, where they could kind of turn it off, but then they'd go back to it.
I'm one of them, right? Absolutely, right? Drugs weren't even a big problem for me until 18, 19 years old, right? So, and I'd been on my own from 14. So there's some real formative years there where it could have very much been. And it was just like, you got the chance, you'd smoke a joint or have a beer or whatever. But they certainly didn't run my life until they did.
Exactly, right? And,
and
I think for him, so he did that. He was going to college, doing a lot of the right things and doing well in a lot of ways. But I think he actually went to a dealer to get coke, and the dealer said, I'm all out, but I've got some crack. And he's told me that it was just a totally different ball game. And that's sort of the first time that there was sort of a crash and burn that came about. And I don't actually know. I couldn't tell you if, that first use to when we found out, whether that was like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, but it was in that kind of range, right? And then we knew something was up. We knew he wasn't doing well. He was, isolating. His sleep was off, like he had gone from being somebody who was like it's very rigid and very perfectionistic and typically the kind of person who's like up in the morning early for work, and suddenly it's like skipping, like, because he was in college at the time, so like not going, or up late at night, couldn't get up in the morning. And then he actually ended up telling us, and it was like I remember details of that night because again, you're going back a long time ago, but he was quite upset. Like, he was emotional, he was upset, there was something wrong, and we couldn't get him to tell us what it was. Like, I remember I went and spoke to him, my dad went and spoke to him, like, we're all just like, just tell us, like, what is it? And I think he just was so ashamed of himself that like trying to say it out loud was really hard. And it was actually like, I remember saying to him, like, is it fixable? Because like my head started to go like, does he have HIV? Like, like, what is this? Is this something we can deal with? Is it something we can fix? And he said yes, which in hindsight, like in the moment, like it didn't mean a lot to me. But I'm like, okay, so he believed he could get well. But he had debated, he'd done his own research. He knew a program he wanted to go to. And he actually, which is like, again, for somebody who, I think he was less naive, obviously, than the rest of us at that point. But it's not like he had spent years living in hard addiction, But I think he realized he couldn't stop. And so, I mean, when you realize that you can't control your use, it doesn't take a lot of research to realize what definition that kind of equates to, right? Whether you call it addiction or substance use disorder or whatever you want to call it. But he had found a program, and he said like he had considered literally writing us a note and just going, like just leaving and saying, we wake up to a note saying, I'm gone to this treatment center. We talked about, though, that of course at the time, you grew up in Canada where when you need help, you get help, you go to the doctor. At 19, 20 years old, whatever he was at the time, you don't realize that, oh, you mean there's certain help I need in this country that I have to pay how much money to get? Right? Because his program he went to was a private program, like it was not free. And we actually later found out that you could get provincial funding to go, but there was about 100 steps you had to jump through to get that approval. And they had this so I lived in Nova Scotia at the time, and the Nova Scotia government's response to us as a family initially, because we ended up paying, we're like, we're just going to take them and then we'll figure out the money later. When we did that, of course, the first response we got from them was, you need approval before you go. So if you go without approval, even if we go back and do an assessment and realize it was the appropriate thing to do, too bad.
It's just crazy. There's this whole gap in our system. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Ange too, about, needing help and getting help and the things that have to happen in between, the time, the money, the hoops, all of that. Right. And
totally.
Of course, you having, your lived experience as a loved one and your professional experience as a psychiatrist, me with my lived experience, and of course, now this platform and talking to so many people. Well, the iron's hot, right? This isn't something like when somebody's got that lucidity, right? Yeah. It's like now. It's not when we're done jumping through hoops. It's not when we've come up with the money.
And I think that that urgency became really clear to us. And again, I don't know how aware my mom and dad would have been about what we were sort of up against. I certainly had no idea. like I remember kind of being like, oh, okay, so this is like, once he had told us, like, okay, this is what he's doing. He realized that he needs to stop and he needs some help. So he's willing to go get help. So we'll send him to go get help, and then done. I literally thought that. Like, now when I think about it, I'm like, what? But I'm like, if I thought that, there are other people in the world who still think that right now, that that's what this takes.
Right. Well, then
and of
Tony
course,
spoke to it last week when he said, right? I thought, okay, we've shipped him off to treatment. He's going to be
yeah,
okay now.
yeah,
And
if only.
if you don't know, you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I can totally see that. So,
And I think
yeah.
the reality kind of hit for me when, I think the next day, I think my dad was like, well, we're going to help. So I think him and like they called this program to get the information to find out about it. And it was like, oh, okay, like you have to medically detox before you go there, which is true of a lot of programs, right? If they don't have physicians on site, then you have to do that as a prerequisite because, again, certain substances, withdrawals can be medically dangerous. And so they need to know that you're through that dangerous or that potentially dangerous phase. But so again, it's like, okay, well, then we found the detox, all good, take him to the detox. I remember going home and being like, it'd been a few rough days, hadn't slept that well. Like now we can all take a breath. And of course, the next morning, find out that the dealer picked him up at the door. And, that moment for me was just
I shouldn't laugh, but whatever, right? That's
but
where
you
we're
kind of
at.
have to, right? I feel like now it is
the
like I'm with
naivete
you.
of that, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
but it was those days of sort of watching that stuff unfold and realizing that even if there's a desire to stop, even if there's awareness you need to stop, even if there's a desire and access to help. Some people don't have a family that can say, sure, we'll send you to that program next week. Let's just do 4 days of detox first. So it's like even having all of those things, which makes you one of the lucky ones. It's still so hard. And again, for me, like I remember being like almost like watching it at times from like a bird's eye view and just being like, what is happening? But you know what I mean? Like I couldn't get it. And and I think I told you this, but like he had gone to detox 24 hours later, left. And so it took, my dad, me, my uncle, friends, all trying to figure out where he had gone, tracking him down. And then also what came up was this realization that, because he would always say, well, I'm at these buddies' houses. So then when we were looking for him, we reached out to these people and then found out that, like, because I was kind of annoyed, which of course, again, is ignorance too, because it's not like somebody else's fault, but I was like pissed off at these guys. Like, like, are you guys all doing this? And why didn't you tell us this was happening? And whatever. And they said like, but we would ask him to come over and he'd say that he was busy with other things. And then he'd be telling us that he was there. So he was telling everybody he was somewhere else.
Sounds pretty typical of, yeah.
Right. And ultimately just isolating.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we finally did find him, and it took, I remember already, and that was like one day of formal, trying in a formal setting to do something about this and realizing in that first 24 hours how hard it was, hence leaving.
Mm-hmm.
I could already see this fear and hopelessness that I can't do this, because I remember before he went to detox the first time, he would be pretty open about like, okay, so like these are the steps and this is what we need to do. And, but I remember sitting at that friend's house because he ended up showing up at a buddy's place. And I remember sitting there talking to him and it's like, you've got to go back. Like, like we need to take you back. And there was already a shift. And I think it came from, I went and I couldn't stay.
The shame of that. Oh yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
There's so much happening.
Yeah.
In a mind that's so obsessed with what's this. And it's
interesting because for you, right? Like having been in his shoes, your thought maybe, not to put words in your mouth, but it's like the first thing you just said now was shame. For me as a family member, I get now how much shame there is, but in that moment, what I saw wasn't shame. It was like terrified fear.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I just could see fear, right?
Yeah.
And so he went back, and then this guy that I was dating, we sat outside detox for the next 5 days. It was just like, and like my parents also, and they would come and drop off food, or, you got to take a coffee or a toilet break. But, and I remember talking to him on the phone, and he was terrified. I will never forget that. Like there was he asked me once to promise him that he would be okay,
Wow.
and like, again, being someone who in that moment didn't understand this at all, I just remember thinking like, what? Like you're in a hospital. Like, of course you're going to be okay. But that's where it's like, and we were lucky because I get that for some families, their experience with their loved one in active addiction is violence, aggression,
Theft, all
hatred,
those things.
anger. And we didn't see that. And the thing again is that if someone is coming at you with aggression and anger and hostility, it's harder to feel compassion for that person, right? Because you're in defense mode, or you're afraid of them or whatever. And we never, ever, ever. And so we are lucky that way. And if somebody is in a hostile, angry, aggressive state, you're not going to see their vulnerability. And vulnerability elicits compassion.
Yeah.
But for us, we didn't have that hostility side. And we were like, I remember seeing the fear. And that was what, for me, started this thing of people telling me this is a choice. It's like he wanted nothing but to be not in that situation. And he was terrified. And I believe felt unable to stop despite wanting to, So again, it's like he was not choosing to be where he was. He did not want to be in that situation. He couldn't see the way out. He already, so early in this battle, I could see the fear that he wasn't strong enough or wasn't capable to get out of it. And again, if you see that, and that's the hard thing to explain to people who haven't seen it. But when you see that, I knew in that moment that he did not want to be there and he was not choosing this.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to communicate to people who haven't seen it.
It is such a hard thing. My battles online and just in the comments, we've talked at length about that too, right? And I think about it. It's funny because it's one of the things I think about a lot when I drive, like when I'm driving around on my scooter here in Thailand, is how to convince people of that. And it's like, you said it there, right? Unless somebody has seen it in real life, and not the anger and the violence and the theft and the lying, but like actually seen, like you're talking about, that fear and that desperation and that like those real raw, the vulnerability side of it. Seeing only the anger, seeing only all that crazy negative behavior only reinforces, some of the ill will that's spread to those people that have SAD, right?
Totally.
And justifiably is maybe not the right word. Understandably so is a better word for that, right? You can understand how somebody doesn't want to, is not interested in a conversation about how sick that person is. They just got their nose broken or their jewelry stolen or their, right? There's a lot of anger there. There's a lot of anger, and I can understand that, right? So,
And I do too, with the exception that I feel like I also see other conditions where, for example, like if you take a form of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, okay, it happens in younger people. So it's not, Alzheimer's, right? Everyone thinks of dementia as Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. Alzheimer's tends to happen in old people. They get forgetful. They don't remember things. Frontotemporal dementia happens much younger. So like cases I've seen, oftentimes they're in their 50s, early 60s. And the first presentation of it is usually a personality change. So it's not a memory thing. but they'll start to, their personality will be different. They might become disinhibited, kind of inappropriate, more agitated. And when those people get a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia, everybody's so quick to forgive for, the fact that they've been acting kind of like an asshole. Or, they've been saying things that are out of character, inappropriate. And so on one hand, I get it, but I still think that the difference in if you're told you have frontotemporal dementia versus you're told that your loved one is suffering with substance use disorder is the stigma piece. There's no stigma against frontotemporal dementia. It's like, oh, like they have this brain disease and, it's just like they're sick and that's why they did those things. And so we are going to forgive them. And it's just like, forgiveness granted kind of deal. At the end of the day, addiction still, there are still so many people who believe that if you have an addiction, you're bad. It's your fault. It's your choice. And so even though we say that they did that because they're suffering with this condition, this disease, this disorder, call it what you want, people still struggle to go to a place of forgiveness and compassion because there's still that deep-rooted brewing question of, is this within their control? Is this their choice? Is this their fault? Is this because they're inherently bad?
Generations of that. Literally generations of that stigma, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which I try to give the human race more credit than just being bad or shitty, right? Maybe sometimes in a naive way, but I like to think that even that wasn't born in a bad place. It was born out of ignorance, the not knowing kind, not the asshole kind. And it just kind of, for generations that was the case, right? Like you could certainly answer this. When did brain imaging become a commonly used thing? Say, when's the first time somebody used brain imaging to diagnose somebody with SUD? When's the first time that happened?
I don't actually know the answer to that.
You must have the decade down.
I don't actually.
That's a funny thing, right? So
I know.
Pretty recently, right? Like brain imaging hasn't even been around for more than 30 years. I'm thinking. Right?
70s.
70s. Okay, so about 30
it would
years.
Be,
but when did they start
MRIs.
looking at addicts? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then the high definition type of brain imaging it takes to pick up on something specific like that, So
exactly.
Very, very recent. I see you're Googling your ass off over there.
Yeah, 60s, 70s. Like I'm just looking up like when, you ask a radiologist, they'd tell you who did it and when they did it and what the doctor's name was who invented it or whatever. But it's like, it looks like 60s were CTs, MRIs in the 70s.
And they wouldn't have even looked at somebody with SUD.
No.
They wouldn't even have, nobody would even have thought to say, I wonder if.
Yeah.
Right? Like that would have happened, I'm guessing here, but 80s, 70s, 80s at best. Right? So you're talking generations of this stigma building up around ignorance.
Yeah.
And because of the behaviors associated with it, it's just so easy to get angry.
Yeah.
It's just so easy. And as you discussed in the last episode, it's a lot easier to be angry than scared or worried or compassionate. Right.
Totally. And the thing, is that within psychiatry, you can also diagnose people with personality disorders, right? And again, we all have a personality. We all have lots of traits of various personalities. We're not all personality disordered. Okay. Like I start talking to people and they're like, you're going to diagnose me. It's like, no, you can diagnose myself while I'm at it if you want, but it's like, we've all got a personality. We all have traits. It's fine. And really off topic, but the reason as a psychiatrist that I try to figure out someone's personality is not because I want to come up with another label or put a sticker on their forehead. But different personalities respond to different therapeutic modalities and interventions.
Yeah.
So we are doing people a disservice if we don't identify what their personality style is. Like I've had patients who I've said, I think what you need isn't medication, it's therapy. And they'll say, I've done 10 years of therapy, hasn't done anything for me. And then when we look at it, it's like, oh, but you've done 10 years of this therapy, when you really need 10 years of that therapy. And then you're just going, how much money did you spend on your 10 years of therapy? So it's something that, we do, and I think we should do it for that reason. But the point I wanted to make is that, like, even within the diagnostic manual, when someone's in active addiction, you cannot give them these diagnoses. And there's good
No.
reason for that. Because if you take someone in active addiction, especially if their addiction is severe to the point that it's caused functional impairment in their life in terms of relationships and employment and housing, then you can bet your ass that these people are engaging in activities and behaviors to survive. And
Yeah.
so the number of times that I have had patients where, when I read through their historical chart, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and then through time working with some of these people where they're off drugs, they're off their substances, they're stabilized, they're housed, they're fed, they're warm, they're safe.
They're none of these things.
They're none of these things, So unfortunately, I think that the life of addiction often comes with a lot of really shitty behaviors. And
it does, without a doubt. Yeah.
And families get angry and frustrated and sometimes are victim to this. Again, we were some of the lucky ones that way, but you hear about people who, their kids are selling their jewelry and, busting in their front doors. And so it can be hard for people. Well, you just sold my wedding band and you broke into the house and damaged the home. And then you're asking them to have compassion for this individual. And so
it's tough. It's tough. It is, right? Unfortunately, that's the way it is. Okay, so back to Lisa's story here. Your brother is now, at this point in the journey, in detox, scared. Legitimately scared, fearful of what's happening to him, what's going to happen with him. Where does it go from there?
Yeah, so, he went to treatment after that. And I always joke, I don't know if he would find it funny, but I remember when we picked him up and it was like, oh, I just, I owe someone money. Like, I just want to drop off the money. And we're like, meh. Like, we were like, we are out of here. But yeah, he went
too, because that was that guarantee. That's what that was, right? So, okay, I'll fast forward a bit on you here. Did he ever cop to that? Did he ever admit to? Yeah. But he didn't owe anybody money. It was Well, you probably owed people money.
And he probably did owe somebody money, but it was like, right? Well, just pay them the money and get a little bit of something. Just Yeah. It's always one last time, right? One last time. But so he went to treatment and he stayed, he did the program. It was a good program. And I've said this last week, I think, but I didn't say when, but I think it was the first time he was in treatment that I remember getting a message or a call or a text, I don't remember, but that he was sitting outside having coffee, watching the sun come up, and just felt peaceful. And that has, from that day, epitomized my wish for him and my wish for everybody suffering with addiction. It's like you start to realize real quick that, you got people out there saying, oh, well, I want my kid to, I don't know, be a lawyer. I want my kid to live in a mansion. I want my kid to travel the world. And it's like, you know what, like, all great. But honestly, if we get through life and we can enjoy a cup of coffee and watch a sunrise and feel peace.
Yeah. Right.
Is there really anything that matters more?
There's not. And that's something that I guess it comes with real recovery, right? Is understanding that. And at least for somebody who suffered an addiction, for everybody, I think it's important to, at some point in your life, to come to that. And unfortunately, many people don't. But I can tell you for myself, like, once you've had everything taken from you, once you've had everything and then you've had everything taken from you or done whatever with everything, once you've gone from everything to nothing, and then you come back from that, at some point, it's just like, now I get what's important and what's not, right? So,
and it's a gift. I mean, a very expensive gift. The price you pay to have that realization in your life is devastating.
Absolutely. It at least when it comes to addiction, right? Like it absolutely, I admire people that come to it in softer ways, most certainly. Right. But like what I have gone through personally to get to a point where I'm happy if I'm not worried about paying my rent. Right. Like really, I was thinking about that the other day. It's like, okay, I'm finally in a place, I'm in Thailand, so it's much cheaper here, where I have to like save up if I want a new piece of equipment for the podcast, but I'm not worried about paying my rent next month.
Yeah.
And like the kind of peace that comes with that is just like, I could literally live the rest of my life on the amount of money I make right now. Right. And of course, at some point, that's not feasible. I have to retire or whatever. That's another problem for down the road. But like,
yeah,
as far as material goods go and a lifestyle goes, I live a very simple, humble life, and I could literally spend the rest of my life at this and be absolutely happy at this level, right? Of just not having to worry about the basics and know that, I got my dog and I can go for a ride and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. So
and not being
that's
a
my cup of
slave
coffee
to this
watching
disease,
the sunrise,
right?
Yeah.
Like
right.
there's the contentment that you realize that having a roof over your head, a dog who's pumped to see you, a beach that you can go walk on, like simple pleasures, but you only get to experience those because you have gotten yourself
Absolutely
out of being a slave to the disease of addiction. Like to me, that's
100%.
what I see when I see someone in active addiction. Is I will literally look at patients and try to imagine like what's in there, because I have this, I feel like they're trapped in there. I'm not possessed in a religious sense, okay, but it's just like overtaken.
Some would argue, right? But well, I think about like, the cycle that I was in. So I would get up in the morning, be absolutely dead broke. I would wait for my phone to ring. Somebody wants some dope, and that would start my day. By the end of the day, I might have $1,000 in my hand. I would wake up broke, and I would wait for my phone to ring, and that's hell, right?
There's
So
no
other people have different
that.
hustles to feed their habits, right? And whatever, and do things arguably worse. Though I don't even like gauging things morality anymore about what we do to feed our habits. I mean, a lot of us that were dealers like to kind of ride on that and say, well, at least I wasn't, and at least I wasn't. But at the end of the day, you're feeding that shit. So you're as bad, maybe worse. But that cycle of every day, I told you about my friend in Regina just before I left, was to get up, hustle up enough money to place an ad online so she can go prostitute herself, just to not be sick, so she can start her day to get her hustle on and live in that cycle. That is hell.
Yeah.
Right? That is slavery at its rawest form is what that is, right? Mm. And it's a horrible, horrible way to live.
And I remember like many, many, many years later into this story, like I remember when my brother was unwell at one point, and I had gone to spend a day with him. And I remember as he was talking to me exactly that. It was like he was so in the weeds of getting through a day that my outsider high view of just walk away. It's like it wasn't even on his brain that he could just walk away from this, because he was in this state of fight or flight.
All the time.
All the time. And I actually said that to him. I was like, you need to remember. I was like I can sit here and listen to this all day, but you don't need to do this. We can walk. Just walk away. But I could see in that moment again that, and I think the gift of having a loved one who has suffered an addiction is you get to understand this disease in a way that no textbook is going to teach you, because you know this person. And so when you see them and you see legitimate fear in their eyes, you know what you're looking at. You know they're terrified. And if you can sit there and look at someone terrified and tell me they're choosing this, then you need to go get your head checked. And again, like to sit there and have this conversation with him and to see how he couldn't even see the forest from the trees. Like he was so in the trees that it was all about plotting and planning and scheming. And it didn't have a malicious intent to it, but it was all survival driven.
Yeah.
And again, this is somebody who had people like me going, we can drive. We'll drive as far as we need to drive right now. But also you end up becoming connected to the people that you're in hell with.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes this thing of, but then I'm leaving these people behind.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as an outsider, I get it. Like I get for any family member going, yeah, but like, what the hell are you going to do to help them when you're sick? Like you can't help them. But it's still like I could see how hard that was. It's like, you've gone to war together. And the idea then of just walking away from people that, you're living your day to day with, you're fighting and surviving with day to day. There's also that part of it. And
that's I wonder how much of that, and I'm trying to think back to my own experience, is the addict brain trying to keep you in that place?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a bit of both. I've had I've wondered this exact thing, and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for every individual, the percent that we would divide that up would be different.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a part of it that it's like your unwell brain that wants you to stay unwell tells you, well, you can't leave your friends. Yeah. Like, don't leave your friends behind.
That's a low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
For the addict mind, right? No, you got to stay here. These are the
totally.
people that, the way your mind plays tricks on you. Who knows, right? About that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And just because I'm mindful of time and I could like talk about this, it's like a 25-year story. So it's like I could talk about it till the cows come home. And I'm sure every time we talk about it, it's like there's different things that come up
and that's the thing, right? There's always going to be more time, but
yeah.
So, yeah.
But so one of the things that is also I find fascinating, and maybe this is more like the physician in me finds it fascinating, is that through the journey, right? So through this journey of say 25 years, where there has been numerous residential treatment stays, which again, it's a chronic illness. I always say to people, expect that, obviously our goal is that people go into recovery and they remain in recovery. And because from a suffering perspective, I'm like, that is how you will minimize your suffering in life. But nonetheless, it happens. And I actually think for most people, it takes multiple goes through things to start to be aware of your own bullshit, right? Because it'll happen, right? Like in my family's case, it would always start with, and again, he was never a drinker, but it'd be like, well, I'm out with the guys and everyone's having a beer and alcohol's not my problem. So like I can have a beer. But again, if you're someone who's got a severe addiction to Coke or crack or meth or something, then often that's just, it's one beer and then the next thing it's a crack pipe or whatever it is,
Yeah.
But one of the things I find interesting is how in the medical community, we refer to it as a progressive illness. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me how even with periods of abstinence, even with various interventions and different recovery programs and different sort of therapies and whatever, it still progresses.
Yeah. You're always one drink away. You're always one use away, right?
But it gets worse. Like you can have you can have 5 years sober. And when you go into a relapse, often, and I've seen this with patients and I've experienced it in my family, that next relapse is going to be worse than the last one, even though in between was 5 years sober.
It's making up for lost time. That's what I call that. Right?
Yeah. It's like, it's such a baffling disease, right?
It really is. I mean, I went 20 years without crack. I was doing Coke in that time, but I wasn't doing crack.
Yeah.
And the moment I picked up that pipe, I made up for 20 years. right? It was crazy the amounts that I once. It's nuts. So yeah.
And again, I can see how for a family member, they would look at it and go, but you learned a bunch of stuff in your sober time. You learned things, you developed an understanding, you did therapy, you went to treatment, you went to AA, you did all the things. So when you relapse, aren't you relapsing with all this new knowledge that
absolutely
doesn't matter?
And I would offer that there's that shame again, right? Well, fuck it.
Yeah.
And it like,
I mean, I really feel
if you have a period of sobriety, it's like, and you start using, that's some horrible shame, right? And
I mean, we've seen this recently
in our own community, right?
And we have seen how deadly shame is, right?
Yeah.
But I do. I think it's something that we've touched on in the podcast, and I think it's something you've touched on with other guests and people, but I really feel like it needs a titled episode. Like it needs to be a focus of that, and I don't know who the right people would be to have on to do it, but that talk about relapsing and what comes, because we talk a lot about recovery, and we talk, and that's great, but it is a relapsing illness. It is not a cured illness. And so to me, it's like talking about relapse and the shame that comes with relapse is so critical, because people love to talk about their recovery stories because they're proud of them, and they should be proud of them. And that's got its place. But when people relapse, that's so meaningful, is talking about the shame that comes with that. And so what do you do? Like if you're in recovery and you relapse and you are filled with shame and you're living this secret, and again, it's hard to say. I don't know that there's, it's not like we're going to have an episode and that's going to solve everybody's relapse struggles, but
it's a conversation to have, most certainly, right?
I mean,
absolutely it is.
Because I think too that the longer that you're sober, the longer that you're well, the harder it is to deal safely with a relapse, because
directly proportionate, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, right? And especially, as of course we've seen recently, if somebody has an identity that's built around their recovery, especially then, right? And I've said this to you offline, but you would be kind of the obvious first choice for me to go to if I relapse. You would be, right? Or at least in the top 5 people that I would talk to. And for that reason, you would be the last person I wanted to. You know what I mean? So there's that dichotomy there that's really, really hard to address.
I know.
Right.
And I'm going to say this now, and I've thought this, and I wish that I had said this 6 months ago, but for example, if there's somebody, and I'm not saying I'd only do this for people in my world, but if there are people who know me, and if those people are in recovery and relapse, you call me and I promise you that I will get you to treatment, and it can be our secret if you need it to. Until you're ready to tell your story, we will disappear. And you know what I mean? Like, again, we've had this experience recently, and the number of times that I sit there and think like, and obviously it's the phone call that's so hard to make, but if that phone call had been made, and I'm not God, don't get me wrong. But it's like, if there are people in my world right now who are in recovery, and it's like, you know what, you don't need to explain it. You don't need to talk about it. Just call me and say, come now, and I will come. And I will get you there. I will make you disappear. We will come up with a story. We will come up with a narrative. It's not my story to tell. You tell it when you're ready, but we can get you somewhere to get the help that you need. And and obviously to make that call, that's the struggle. That's the podcast that needs to happen, is how, what's the message, and is there a message? Maybe the point is there's no message. I don't know. Maybe it just needs to be a frequent conversation that's had with the hope that some percent of people, it changes the decisions that they make.
Well, if you can change one, right? That's all it takes. You can change one.
What I wouldn't give,
So,
yeah.
We're going to pick this up maybe next week. Maybe we'll have somebody on next week. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing yet. But, I never plan ahead. Come on. That's some other guy. There's lots more conversations to be had, as there always is with us, right? For now, though, I think that's a really powerful message to exit on. So we'll switch gears and go to what's my favorite part of the show, and that's the Daily Gratitudes. So these Daily Gratitudes are brought to you by FAR Canada. That's Families for Addiction Recovery. They offer a group meeting 4 times a month for family members of people in SUD, so they can get together with some people who are in a similar frame of mind and have faced similar journeys online, of course. They also offer a one-on-one peer-to-peer support system that's absolutely amazing. They match you up with a peer, somebody who's kind of got some similarities in your journey, somebody you can relate to a bit more, that's had some training and can work with you. They also offer some one-on-one support if you call them during business hours and talk to Sydney, who's absolutely one of my favorite human beings on the planet these days. And they do it all for free. That's the best part. So go ahead and check them out, guys, at farcanada.org. And in the meantime, here's your daily gratitudes. So what are you grateful today? What are you grateful for today, Lisa?
I think just from this conversation, I can tell you that I'm grateful that I don't know that suffering. I do. It's in my family. It's in my genetics, and it could have just as easily been me. And, if I could, I would take that. And I've said to my brother, I don't know if I would be strong enough. I don't know what I would do with it. I don't know, would it break me? I don't know. But I can tell you without question that I would unburden him of his suffering if I could. But I, just as we're talking about this today, I am so grateful that I don't know that level of suffering as somebody who's walked in those shoes. If you're somebody out there who has a loved one, but yourself hasn't suffered, you're one of the lucky ones. I think it's one of the most brutal diseases that exists in the world today. And so if, like me, I've peripherally suffered because of addiction, but I don't think for a minute that my suffering even comes close to what his has been. And I do get to get up and have a cup of coffee and and look forward to a coffee and it's so simple. But again, people in active addiction don't get that. They do not get up and get excited about a cup of coffee. I'm lucky that I get to wake up and be excited to talk to a friend. I get to wake up and be excited to drink a hot coffee. I get excited to look outside and see a blue sky. The fact that those things bring me joy makes me really bloody lucky, So, yeah, I'm grateful that I'm one of the lucky ones.
I too am grateful for your muggleness. I am. I really am. I mean, primarily because it means that you didn't have to suffer, and I care about you deeply, so I'm happy for that. But also because of what you have gone through, and your professional experience. I say this all the time. It's a 1 in a million combination. That 1 in 10 to 100 million combination. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Right. That you bring to the table, and I'm very grateful for that. So very grateful for that. As we continue to build a network of people, it's absolutely amazing. And I think the work we have to do is only getting started as far as the people we can reach. But I was really thinking about that. Go ahead.
I just want to interject something. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I actually got a phone call yesterday. So I'm in a number of private Facebook groups that are for Canadian physicians or Alberta physicians or Canadian physician moms, or there's all these groups, right? And somebody had posted in there looking for some help for a patient that was struggling with addiction. And then there was another physician who saw the post. I didn't even see it, who then tagged me and was like, hey, like, do you have something to offer? And ended up then having a conversation with a physician last night who shared with me that it's not a patient, it's a brother, and they're trying to figure out how to help them, what to do. And again, largely because of this network. Like, we had conversations about approaches, about compassion, about understanding, about interventions, about treatment centers. But it's just at the end of that phone call, yes, there was a lot of information exchange that took place. But somebody just saying, like, I feel so much better because of this conversation, and knowing how families feel isolated and scared and helpless and alone. And because of, again, the people that I've met through this podcast, being able to say, here's resources for you, for your parents, for your sibling. And just knowing that they got off the phone still with an unwell brother, but feeling maybe a little bit more hope, maybe feeling a little bit less alone. It's like, again, like that's what makes all of this worth it, right?
Damn straight it does. Damn straight it does. And continuing with the conversation, but now that you went there, I firmly believe, and I've said this many times, the way that myself and members of the Ash Dawson family like yourself, the best way we have to help people in addiction is to help their families.
Yeah.
So you can help their families understand the disease, help their families find resources such as AARC, such as Yatra. If you can help families find their way to these resources and these understandings, ultimately you're going to help the person who's suffering an addiction much more so than having a recovery story. I think that's what we have to offer, and it's what drives me 100% towards. And again, it's almost like this renaissance of purpose that I've like lately that I've had. I messaged you about this organization the other day. It's like for the children of people, and it's like, oh my God, right? So we can complete the circle and kind of like right? Just this whole renewed sense of purpose, right? Which is it's exciting to think that this network can still grow and still.
And it's easy to feel overwhelmed working in addiction, right? Because it is a vicious illness. It's not an easy to treat illness. And so it's easy to feel like we lose a lot of the time. But it comes down as well for me to shifting the lens through which you are gauging what is success, and realizing that, again, if for 5 minutes you can speak to a family member and make them feel supported, cared about, heard, and they can get off a phone call and feel better, well, you just had a successful moment. The person's still unwell. There's still work to be done. But to try to appreciate and like honor those little moments that are successes, like that is a success, especially when you've
100%.
been that sibling and you feel completely lost and terrified and alone. I know very well what it's like to feel like someone cares, to feel like somebody's there, to feel like somebody's listening, to feel like somebody has ideas. Like it can take you from a very low place and like lift you up to feeling like, okay, maybe, maybe I can do this. Maybe we can do this. And so it's just shifting that lens. It's like there are a lot of these little successful moments that we can experience and share and offer. And they make a big difference, like to that person I spoke to yesterday, That's her life.
Massive difference.
And
for it to be you too, of course, that never even really dawned on me till just now. It's like, oh my God, that's your person you're speaking to. It's a sibling of it. Like, I can't believe that didn't really hit me till just this moment as you're speaking. But yeah, right. Oh yeah, I know where you've been. I know where you are.
I know what that feels like.
Better than anybody. Yeah, right. So, well, now that we're done interrupting my gratitudes, so all the positive things. I'm also grateful to every single person who continues to interact with, watch, comment, share, like, even talk about our content. Every time you do these things, keeps me living my best life. And my best life is to continue making a humble living, spreading the message. And the message is this: if you're in active addiction right now, today could be the day. Today could be the day that you start a lifelong journey. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, call it a detox, pray, go to church. I don't care. Do whatever it is you got to do to get that journey started. If you're the loved one of somebody who's suffering an addiction right now, you're just taking the time to listen to our conversation. If you just take one more minute out of your day and text them, let them know they're loved. Use the words.
You are loved.
That little glimmer of hope just might be the thing that brings them back. There we go.